Coming up with a price takes work. And today we're going to talk about pricing strategies that you can use to set the best price for your product. Now, the price on its own is the amount that the customer pays to use or gain value from your product or service. Now, the pricing strategy is the method or models that you would use as a business owner to establish the best price to charge your customer. Now, there's a couple of different variables we need to think about when we're setting price. There's some internal and others that are external. From the internal standpoint, you want to think about how much does it cost you to actually create the service that you're offering to your customer. Also, what are your objectives as a company? How much money are you trying to make? Or what are your goals as a business to move forward? And lastly, how are you trying to position yourself in the market? Now, externally, you also want to look at what your competitors are doing, what your target customer expects in terms of pricing, and also how is the industry trending in terms of price. Now, there's two different mechanisms that we should talk about. The first is fixed cost pricing, and that's really looking at price as it relates to fixed variables. So maybe there's a list price, the volume that you're selling, things that don't really change or vary in that regard. And then you also have dynamic pricing. And dynamic pricing is pricing based on market conditions. So if you think about an auction and the willingness to pay at that auction, that's going to affect the ultimate price of what you're selling. Now, your pricing objective is the first step you want to take when it comes to defining your price. This is defining what your goal is as it relates to your revenue stream. What are you trying to achieve? And it relates directly to your go-to-market strategy in that as you enter the market, what are you hoping to see as an outcome as a result of how you set your price? So there are a number of different pricing objectives, and you can choose any which applies to you. So maybe you want to maximize your profit, or you're looking to maximize your revenue, or maybe you want to define yourself as a quality leader in this space, or more of a premium product. All of that can be conveyed with your price, and so you want to just make sure that you're deliberate about your goal with setting your price. So once you've determined this, next we can move on to setting or determining our pricing strategy. So your pricing strategy is really what type of pricing method that you're going to apply to your customers and the products and everything that goes into setting a price so that you're getting the outcome of the objective that you've set. Now, let's start talking through a couple of different pricing strategies that you can consider. So the first is penetration pricing. And what you're doing is essentially in penetration pricing, you're setting a lower price at the onset so you can get as many customers interested in buying your product as possible. So you'll see this a lot with Verizon or other utility companies where they give you a price at the onset that's cheaper and more valuable and exciting to you as a customer, and then over time they'll extend that price to something higher, or maybe your contract to something longer so you can retain that price. So all of that is in an effort to get as much market share as possible. Skimming pricing is where you charge a different price when you first release something, and then over time you end up charging a larger amount to people that didn't buy it when it first came out. So with releases, a lot of times you'll see there's like a great bundled discount and you can get things at a lower price, and then if you wait a little bit, it ends up going back up. But then over time that price comes down again. And the reason why is that over time, the public's willingness to pay changes. And so you're trying to skim, if you will, as much of the market at the different stages of the buyer journey to buy your product or service. So you're making as much revenue over time as possible. Competition pricing looks directly at what your competitors are doing, and then you really only have three options here. You can decide to price lower, higher, or the same. Now, you'll see a lot of companies have price matching so that they're able to kind of always match their competitor and they don't have to worry about constantly fluctuating in price to do that. Bundle pricing is where you take multiple things that have a higher price separately and you bundle them together for an overall lower price, but you're still able to sell more quantity. So this is a great product or quantity optimizing tool where you're selling more if maybe the customer just wanted one thing, but they feel like they're getting a deal if they get all three. Now, product line pricing is on the business to actually create different levels of product. So maybe there's a high tier, mid tier, and low tier product, all sold at different prices. So depending on what the customer needs, they can choose to buy at those different levels, maximizing the overall quantity of what you're selling. Psychology pricing is looking at the psychology of our perception of the actual price itself. So when we see a price like $29.96, which isn't a couple, it's only what, 4 cents off from $30, but to the customer, they perceive it as a lower bargain price. And so pricing things with psychology pricing kind of taps into the customer's perception of a deal that they're getting, but it's really maximizing the revenue that you're getting over time. Now, optional pricing is where you set a base price, but you offer add-ons for additional price so that the customer can kind of build themselves up to the right price for them. And then with premium pricing, you're really charging a high-level price, not based on the cost, but really based on the perception that something that is expensive is more valuable. So you'll see with luxury items, a lot of times they're priced at very high price points, and their competition is often in that range as well, so that they can convey that this is a high-value product. Value-based pricing is interesting because you're pricing not based on how much it costs to produce the product, but how it makes the customer feel and their perception of the product. So makeup is a really great example of this because it doesn't really cost a lot to produce makeup, but the markup on makeup is extremely high because of the value that it represents to the customer. And then we have cost plus and cost-based pricing, which are very similar, but vary in slight ways. So if we think about cost plus pricing, that's really just saying, what is the cost of my product and adding on a 25% markup so it doesn't really change, and you do that across the board. Now, cost-based pricing does that, but it also considers market conditions, maybe the industry, interest rates, regulatory or industry environment, all of that comes into play on top of your cost considerations. Now, there are a couple of pitfalls you want to watch out for when you're setting price, and they're mainly around making sure that you're making the ethical choice when you're setting price. So if we think about price fixing, where you might agree with others in the industry to set a specific high price, whereas competitive pricing wouldn't have allowed for that, that kind of creates an area where, it's maybe not necessarily legally wrong, but ethically, it puts your customers at a knowledgeable disadvantage, which is something that you should never do as a business owner. There's also price discrimination, which is illegal, where you are charging different people different prices for the same exact product. There's also price skimming and opportunistic pricing, which is trying to take advantage of customers and kind of milk them for the highest price possible. And though as a business that might seem like the logical thing to do, you do have to keep in mind that we have tons of regulation in this space as it relates to customer and consumer protection. And so you don't want to just try to milk the customer for everything they have, but you really want to consider what's your strategy and what can you do that aligns to your strategy without you having to go into this unethical gray area.